My name is Ken Reid, and as a member of the Aircrew Association, it is my pleasure to introduce Bob Porter, who flew as a bomb aimer in 419 Squadron of the RAF. As Bob narrates his story, you will see he had both an interesting and exciting career. Now, Bob, could you start off by telling us briefly what you did before the war, where and when you joined up?
Thank you, Ken, for the nice introduction. My talk tonight is about my Air Force years and what I did a little bit before the Air Force. I was born in South Burnaby and was brought up there. I went to Burnaby South High School. In the spring of '41, I joined the Air Force, and we went to the Fairbank Morris building learning how to be a mechanic, and then out to Vancouver Tech. From there, I went to Toronto Manning Pool in September of '41. We went there from St. Thomas, aero engine mechanic, and then McLeod, Alberta. I was a mechanic at McLeod, Alberta, but there was no way I could get overseas. They weren't sending any mechanics overseas. So I was walking up the mess hall from the mess one day, and this fellow was going up to headquarters, asked him where he was going. He said he was going to remuster. I never heard of remustering. I said, I'll go with you. 10 days later, I was up at Edmonton ITS. They were short of aircrew then, I guess. I did my ITS in Edmonton. Then I went to Mossbank for my gunnery, Portage La Prairie, where we get our bomb aimers, and graduated. I can remember we graduated there and went overseas. We were young, full of ambition, roaring to go. I can remember my mother was in the hospital the day I left for overseas, and I was with my buddy, and she was crying, and I said to my buddy, I wonder what's the matter with her. You know, we don't have too much feeling those days, but for poor mothers, I guess they did a lot. I went overseas on the Queen Mary, and then went to Bournemouth, where most of us all were. We were all very proud of our wings and our sergeant stripes or commissions, whatever you had. I had sergeant stripes. I went to OTU in Long Marston, and then over to Honeybourne. I met a girl called Ginger in Honeybourne, and later married her. Some of the old type RAF were pretty upset when I was flirting with the WAFs, but I liked WAFs, and I enjoyed it very much. I went to conversion unit on Halifax's, and then went to the commander course, which we all did. I did the 10-mile hike. I did the 25-mile hike. I was getting married on the Saturday. The 40-mile hike was on the Wednesday. I thought, you know, that's tough. So I went to the captain. They were miserable. You all know how those Army were miserable. And I went up and I told him my situation. He says, there's no way I can let you get off that 40-mile hike. But he says, I'll tell you, the passes are all made out, and they're in the top left-hand drawer. And I'm going for tea. It took me a minute, and I said, thank you, sir. I waited till he was gone. I picked up my pass, and I was off. I didn't care no more. I got married in South Wales, and we had a great wedding. From after my honeymoon, we went up to 419 Squadron. After we converted, we had to convert from Halley's back to Lancs, because they were flying all Lancs. My first trip, I went over to Ghent, and that didn't turn out too good. The pilot forgot to take it out of automatic pilot, so the bombing sights weren't working too good. But the camera got broke, so there was no pictures, so nothing happened. I was on D-Day, and I was one of the later ones coming off at D-Day. It was getting morning by the time we were coming back. There were so many Americans coming up, we had to get down and land for a couple hours to clear the air for a while. It was a big night. Very exciting. I was young and everything was exciting then. When I hear these people talk about all those poor souls, poor young kids in the war, I don't know which ones they were talking about, because I mean, my life was very good. On June the 16th was a big night. I went to Sturkrad. It was an awful trip. There was fighters going in, the flak. It was the worst trip we had. Coming back, we went over a German fighter station called Buchholz, and I guess they had every fighter they had up there. and they chased us. We went oops a day. And as I said in the book I'm writing, if you've ever been on a giant dipper, you ought to go in through when you're doing your figure eights. And we went through it all. We're coming across Holland, and on our controls, I was helping the navigator, and we could see the coast coming up. So everything was happy. I mean, we're on our way home. All of a sudden, the wag hollered out, there was a fire in the fuselage. I jumped, I grabbed the fire extinguisher, tore back the fuselage, but the fire was just a solid roar, and there was nothing I could do. I hollered to the pilot, I told him, and he hollered out to jump and get out of here. We all jumped down the nose. The engineer, we had an English engineer, he wasn't too experienced, and he picked up the escape hatch and tried to throw it out. I think they told us 1,000 times, you pick up the escape hatch and you throw it in the aircraft. So we were all jammed in the nose, and then all of a sudden all hell broke loose. She blew up. Now whether it was the gas tanks that blew or what blew, but it sure went. I can remember getting burnt, I can remember the fire, I can remember being tossed around, I can remember saying goodbye to whoever I was going to say goodbye to, and you got to say it in a hurry because you haven't got too much time. So I said goodbye. Next thing I do, I woke up, free floating down in the air. I guess I was below 10,000 feet. I could see the aircraft burning way over in the distance, and I reached here, and I couldn't feel my chute. Now that was another shock. But luckily it had pulled off the hooks and was right up above. I reached up, and I pulled it, and it opened. But I was smart enough, I looked after my privates, because I heard lots of stories how you could lose your privates that way. So at least I looked after my privates, and it slowed me down. And it was raining, it was black, stuff was falling all over. I could see the fire, the burning, and kept my legs ready to crash because I couldn't see where the ground was and didn't have a clue how high I was. We started at 20,000. I guess I woke up below 10,000 and somewhere. So next thing I knew, the brush in the trees, and I landed in a tree. I thought I was only a couple of feet up. I really felt I was in brush, so I pulled up my shrouds and released it, and down I went. I think I hurt myself more then than I did on the flight. But my shoulder was kind of buggered, my head was a little burnt, and my back was sore and my legs, and I was feeling kind of tough. But I was determined right then. I pinched myself a couple of times because I heard of people landing in England thinking they were in Germany and going hiding in England. So I pinched myself a couple of times to make sure I was in Holland, and I knew I was in Holland. But you know, when you're young and you have all this geography, I didn't know what language they spoke in Holland. So I looked up in my little book, which we had, and what we're to say, and it said, I am English, ik ben Engels, kan u mij verbergen, can you hide me? Now if you're a Dutch, that doesn't sound like anything. You don't understand it, neither did anyone else I talked to. But that was the best I could understand. I had to empty my things out of my pocket, and by God, I had a letter from my navigator to his wife. He always wrote his wife. He gave it to me to mail, but it never got mailed. So I buried it. Then I dug a hole. I buried my Mae West. Why, I don't know, because if my parachute was sitting up, you could see it for 10 miles away, floating in the breeze. But I buried everything I thought I should, went through our escape package, because, you know, you don't really feel like it. When you're in squadron, you don't think you're ever going to use it. In fact, over there on the table is the original map I got out of my escape pack. On the first night, on the first house, I hid it in the attic. They cleaned house about 7 years later. He wrote my mother, because he thought I was dead, sending these things to my mother that she'd want it for a memorial, and about how he had found me and everything. But I was still living, because he thought I had got killed the night I got captured, but I never. So I got out, and I had to get someplace, and I wanted to go. I walked that way, and there's a big wire fence. I knew I was either inside a compound or outside a compound, but I didn't have a clue, so I walked away from it. I walked and tried to struggle through the bush, but it was heavy bush. Dogs were barking. Oh, God, I thought the Germans had every dog out in the whole neighborhood. But then I found out later that I got shot down right near a dog kennel. So all the dogs in the kennel were just a rowing. I came to a farm, and it looked like a lonely farm. This was after I laid around all night. I was wet and cold, and I tore all my stripes off and my bomb aimer's badge and everything I had that looked like an airman. And I knocked on the door, and I don't think they understood me, but they were scared anyhow. They give me something to eat. Oh, God, it was awful. But I ate it anyhow. I figured I'd need it before the day was over. And they told me which way not to go. Next time I hiked along, and I was along this old road, and I found a guy on a bicycle, an old guy. I thought, well, he's easy. He's by himself. That's what we were told. Had to get someone by themselves or a farmyard or something like that. So I went through the right routine, and he was scared. But he showed me which way not to go. So it all helped. So the next I run into a bunch of girls on bicycles, all in uniform. I thought, oh, God, private school. But then I got thinking, God, there's too many. If they're wrong, I'll never get out. So I left them, and I'm glad I did. They were NSBers. That's Dutch people that were friendly with the Germans. So that would have been a dead dog. So I walked around for a while. I was half in the ditch and half there, and this guy come with a bicycle with a couple little packs on the side of his bike, and I thought, oh, God, a school teacher, a good chance. So I was kind of scared, we were very young, and I was kind of scared, and I was sitting on the road, and I went psh, 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 like this, and he looked at me kind of dumb, and of course he was scared because he didn't know if I was German, who I was. And right at that time, so many Germans, the Gestapo, were dressing up as airmen, getting into the underground, then blowing her wide open. So he was very scared of me, and I was scared of him. So I went through my Ich ben Engels, kann tu mij verbergen, and he just couldn't understand it. So then I said, Tommy, Tommy, pointing up in the sky. Then he spoke in good English. So he sort of interrogated me a little, and he put me on the back of his bicycle, and we went right up to a town called Driebergen on the back of his bike, and he left me right in front of a little store. And he said he had to go in to see if the coast was clear. So I was standing out there in the corner, and here come two German soldiers with a great big red swastika on. My God, I pinched myself. I said, Bob, you're not in the local theater now. And they just nodded and kept going, because our jacket a lot like theirs, like their scruff jacket, and they never thought. And so they took me in, and they took me right upstairs. There was Mr. and Mrs. Boss there, and there's Annette. And I had a bath, and I laid down for a while and slept. Well, then they started interrogating me, and they had the teacher who we called the teacher. He was Ep Boss, and they called him the teacher because he taught and he knew English. So he interrogated me, and he went through all kinds of stuff. And I talked to him later, and he said, well, if you were a German, you would have slapped me or done something because of the things I said to you. And then there was another fellow called Klaus Middelkoop. He came in. They were all having a go because, it's pretty tough, and they all had guns. They weren't taking any chances. So I stayed there that afternoon, and then they moved me over to Klaus took me home to his place. He lived in a bank, and I lived up on the third story. And he had his mother and father downstairs, so when I come in, they just rushed me right through. They didn't want their mother and dad to know who I was or what I was. And I stayed upstairs. They had a bell system, which one bell, someone was coming into the bank downstairs. 2 bells, be careful, it might be someone. 3 bells, hide. I had a hiding place in the attic, where it was V-joint, and we just slid the V-joint up, jumped in and slid the V-joint back, which was a good hiding place, but I didn't have to use it. These people I just can't emphasize, I might do this 2 or 3 times, how brave the Dutch underground was. Here's a man with a wife, a child, a mother, and father. They all would have been shot if they would have got caught. I got a picture up there of them. They even took my picture and had my picture there if they would ever come back and check later. Well, he had the phone. He used the phone one night. He had a secret Dutch underground phone, and the Germans cut in. So, I had to go. So that night he said they'll be taking me to, I had to move that night. They'd leave me on a corner, and maybe they'd see me again, they'd try, but they didn't know who would be picking me up. Because Fritz, the fellow that happened to pick me up originally, was head of that whole area, and he organized everything. But the people that were taking me there, didn't know who was picking me up, and the people who were picking me up didn't know who took me. So nobody could tell nothing. So he said he'd more likely be in uniform, a policeman. So I stood there in the corner, and this policeman come up, calm, just handed me a cigarette, could speak very little English. He could say, "Be calm, follow me." So I just followed him. We walked up the street as if we owned the place, and the car came, slowed down, stopped. We jumped in the back, and off we were. I mean, the organization was fantastic. We went in town, and I stayed at a house called Bay's. They were two sisters, a school teacher. Her husband was a pilot for the Dutch Airlines, and when the war started, was down in Italy, and as far as she could find out from the Red Cross, he had joined the RAF and was flying out of England, but she didn't know any more. When I tried to escape, I always told her I'd look him up, but I never got that far. At that time, my mother got a telegram saying, "Regret to advise you that your son, 133074, Sergeant Porter, is reported missing after operations overseas. June the 17th. Stop. Letter following." Of course, you all know that's a tough time. And my aunt lived up there by Marlborough, and she come and told my mother. Then they sent a letter from the squadron saying that I was on this German attack and their aircraft. They haven't heard anything, and they may not know. And then they have a whole paragraph saying what a nice fellow I was, and how I played tennis and everything with the group, and and sang in church. My son thought that was very funny. So I was at Bay's place for less than a week, and I was in the backyard, and the damn neighbor stuck her head over the fence and started talking to me. All I could do is nod and mumble, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So Mrs. Bay got nervous. She phoned Rockers. Rockers landed there that night with two bicycles in his uniform, one bicycle for me, and we headed out to bike. And he was sure glad I could bike, because believe me, a lot of airmen couldn't, and they had big problems when they were in the underground over there because they couldn't even ride a bloody bicycle. So I at least could ride a bicycle good. So he told me to follow him. He couldn't speak much English. He said to follow me about a telephone behind. And if anyone asks, just act deaf and dumb, or I don't know anyone, or I'm all by myself, to keep everybody clear. So I ran it over to, and I saw in the house, it was a police house with a police sign on it. I thought, holy Christ. And that's where he lived. He lived in the police house, and he was the chief of police, and he had his office in the police station. So he had a wife, Dickie, I called her Mama, and him Papa, because of the kids. And now I was only supposed to be there for a few hours because I was supposed to stay with this American lady. But more Dickie got talking to me, and more she got thinking of this American lady, and more she got thinking of me married. I was married then. So Dickie said, no way is he going out of there to live with an American widow when he's a married man. So I went upstairs to bed, and the next day I was going to stay there that day, and I ended up staying there 6 months. But I mean, it was right in the police station. He had a young wife, she was 32, and 2 children. They told the children that I was from Groningen. Groningen, that's a city, area in northern Holland that speak a total different dialect. So they couldn't understand me, so he told all the kids, everybody, "Oh, he's my uncle from Groningen, and we can't understand him." So that all went there. It was a very interesting place because it was right in the hub of everything. Not only was he chief of police, but he was head of the underground of that whole unit. He looked after and fed 295 Jewish people, divers, which were Dutch people, going into hiding because the Germans wanted them to go to Germany, or people like myself, 295. And believe it or not, I am the only one that has contacted her and befriended her after the war. It's amazing how people can have such little thought of others. Fritz, the man that came around, he used to come around quite often. He was the fellow that picked me up. Come along my wife's birthday, this really amazed me. The Dutch people really think of birthdays. I woke up for my wife's birthday and there was a great big bouquet of flowers in my bedroom. I thought, holy crimey, here everybody coming and congratulating me on my wife's birthday. But they do that in Holland. They all congratulate the whole family on their wife's birthday. And I got a suit for my birthday. A tailor came around, measured me, and I had my suit. made, and a barber came and cut my hair. So I had a suit, a haircut, and the works taken. About that same time, a young couple came around, and they were building hiding places. They were called, that's their main job. They built me a hiding place upstairs. I had a little bedroom. They built a bookcase right in the wall. And the bookcase swung right out. And they even put a brick backing in it in case the Germans came and knocked the wall. It would be solid both places, and they wouldn't be able to find it. And I used to keep the bookcase swung out, and my little bed was there. And what you'd have to do, I had a mattress in there, a water bottle, a bottle to pee in, which is very important, and a few odds and ends. And what I would do is turn my mattress over, grab my blankets, take them in, jump in, and pull the bookcase shut. I never had to use it, but it was one of the best hiding places I had. Fritz, there was one case here where Fritz, the guy that picked me up, Rockers, and the chief of police pulled a big raid on a ration card. They had an awful lot of ration cards to get for all these divers and all that, so they had to swipe them. They had this big ration card raid organized. They went through it and was very successful, except it pointed badly to the chief of police. Everything pointed to him. By the time he got home, the Germans were all at his house. They took his wife and 2 little kids to concentration camp. He laid in the ditch and couldn't do a damn thing about it. He went gray overnight. He went into pretty well definitely hiding because he was really well sought, because his pictures were all over, and he never did get caught. His wife was approximately 2-3 months in concentration camp. The kids had been taken away from her, and she had been treated very bad. But they got out. He couldn't get back to her till after the war because they had someone spotting her house all the time looking for him, and he was looked for right to the end of the room. One day I was in Rocker's house, and this young girl come in, a cute thing too. I met some cute ones over there. And she wanted a light for a cigarette. Well, I didn't know what she wanted. So I don't know what I did, and I did something and carried on. She went outside and saw Rockers out there, and she said to Rockers, she said, "Is that guy in there stupid or what? I asked him for a cigarette, a light, and he just looked at me dumb." So Papa says, "No, he's a Canadian airman." Well, she was all smiles. And she always said that she wanted to come back to Canada with me. But every time we'd get fooling around, Dickie would holler out, hey, he's a married man. Get out of there, Pawnee. And I kept saying to Dickie, "You poor sport." And you know, I mean, a young guy, he gets a little what's going on. So I had my own, one day I had my identification card. It's called Personenverbage. And Papa said at the time I had one, and my name was going to be Hank de Graaf. Hank de Graaf died at birth. So I went in to get my picture taken. I had to go into Utrecht, which was about 8 miles, and as usual, I had a bicycle. I followed Papa about a telephone pole and a half, and in we went. Papa said, "Don't say nothing. Just do it. Just nod when I tell you." And he'd take your picture, and he'd do my fingerprints and everything else. I didn't do nothing. And just as I was leaving, the guy sat around in perfect English. He said, "Good night now." I winked and said good night and kept on. So he knew all along. But Papa was never sure, so you never could do anything. One day a policeman come up from Southern Holland, and we didn't know if he was good or not. And Papa hadn't had time, and Papa, being the chief of police, had to look after this policeman. So I had to be deaf and dumb for almost a week. And it's tough, you know, but it was good practice. And then at the end of the time, Papa says, "Well, he's cleared. You can tell him who you are." Well, the guy had little bulgy eyes, you know, anyhow. Well, he was sitting there in the Chesterfield, and I started talking to him in English. Well, I thought his eyes were going to bulge right out of his eyes. And I said to him, I said, "You know, you're a bloody poor policeman, a Canadian living right in the house here with you. You didn't even bloody know me." So he felt a little dumb, but I generally had to keep careful over there because there was an NSB right next door. That's national. They were the ones that were German sympathizers, and he was a postman next door, so I had to watch. For a holiday, they sent me in town to Utrecht to this designer called Hettinger, and he had 2 daughters, one 17 and one 22. The 22-year-old was a dancer on the stage. The 17-year-old was a student. Well, it would have been nice to fool around, but, you know, I was awful scared, always scared of the old man. I thought, gods, if I get caught fooling around, he didn't like me. You know, you get kicked out in the street, it's tough going. So I didn't fool around. But to reminisce back, I hadn't seen him for 50 years, and I lost total track of them, and I got a CD in my computer that's got 9 million phone numbers in, all the phone numbers of Canada. So I looked up Hettinger, and I found her stepmother, who lived over in Souk. And then I found out that her two stepdaughters were in California. So I phoned them up, and I went back down to visit them in January and February, and they had the photographers there and everything else. I had a picture in the big paper and everything else. You know, lost people visiting people I haven't seen for 50 years. So we had a good time. I come back from Rockers, and from Hettingar's back to Rockers. Rockers one day going to Amsterdam. They were having a big raid in Amsterdam, and they needed guns. So Rockers, he always had to do things like that because he was a policeman in uniform. So we strapped the guns just around his legs, his arms, his belly, 28 of them, and then put his big police uniform on and clunk, clunk, clunk. So he had to be very careful. Sat right next to a German colonel on the train going up to Amsterdam, and they talked away. Of course, the German colonel knew he was a good, honest Dutchman because he was a chief of police for the Germans. So, I mean, they knew he was all right. So he had no problem, got the raid done, and got the guns back, and everything went back to normal. That man had more... Some of these people in the underground were the bravest people I ever met. Sometimes we think we were brave. I mean, just nothing compared to some of these people in Holland, where I have such a tremendous respect for them. One day, we had no firewood or nothing, so we were cutting. He was offered a tree in the forest. So him and I had to go out and saw it with this buck saw. So we were out there cutting, and this German colonel or captain or something came along, and he was shooting with his gun. And he was out shooting, and he come up, Papa said, just be calm. And he reached on, I could see him reaching over, and he was just hanging on to his gun sort of like that. And we just talked, and I nodded at the right time and nodded, and off he went again, and never said boo. But I mean, what colonel would ever dream a Canadian airman would be with the chief of police out in the bush cutting wood? They don't expect that. The Allies dropped some bombs. We had to put them all together and put the timers all on. So I can remember there was about 10 of us all in the dining room here putting all these bombs. The directions were in Dutch and English, and wrapping them all up, putting the detonators on, putting everything on to blow the railway up. So they organized the railway, all the railways going into Utrecht were to be bombed at this one exact moment. The RAF, it was planned to go with the Air Force, and the RAF were flying over at the same time we were bombing. So the Germans wouldn't know if it was the RAF dropping the bombs or what it was, to give the underground time to get away. And Papa was bombing just up the street, and I laughed. We were all standing out in the dark in the backyard watching it going up, and boom, and you know, it kind of exciting. But the people at the end of the house, they run out of the house, through the ditch, and got soaking wet and up in the field. And they were very displeased. But they never knew it was Papa that blew the bombs out. But it was very successful, but one poor guy got shot. They went to his house, they knocked on the door and asked, and the parents came to the door, they shot them right there, they burnt their house down, bulldozed everything over, and killed the family. The whole family got. So, I mean, you know, things were tough there. I mean, sometimes we forgot how serious things were. But when they were very, very serious. And one day a German officer was killed in one small village. They bulldozed the whole village and disappeared. Give the people 2 hours to get out, burnt and bulldozed the whole village down and flattened it out. You know, you hear these people talk, there was no Holocaust. There was none of this going on. But believe me, I know it was going on. Early one morning, they called me, and this farmer came and was there, and he had found 2 army guys. I went, and they wanted me to go and interrogate them. And it was Captain Shelderop and can't think of it now, another fellow. I interrogated them for quite a while because we had to be very sure, because there were so many Germans now after Arnhem, took all the uniforms off all the dead Englishmen, put the uniforms on to get into the underground. So I had to be so sure, but it was all right. They were He had pleurisy and inflammation in the lungs. He was sick. Dickie and I nursed him for a week or so, and we had a doctor, Dr. Beelan, come around and check him, and he was sick. So then there's this nurse, Nellie, that worked in the hospital, and she had to go in hiding. She got involved in something with the Germans, had to go in hiding, so she came and nursed him the rest of the time to get him better. But you know, we used to joke around. We really thought he was going to die, and we didn't know what we were going to do with him. I suggest we dig a hole in the backyard and just bury him, and then report it later. Papa, he wanted to take him out on the road and take him down a ways and just leave him there. The Germans found him. Mama wanted to take him out and put him in a farmyard. So we had a lot of ideas, but he didn't die, so we didn't have to. But we had to get him. We would have had to get him away from the house because we were in the chief police house. You don't want to get caught. One night, Papa was out late, and he's always in by at 9, 10 o'clock. He was always home because there's not too many people who were allowed out. 10 o'clock come, no Papa. 10:30 came, no Papa. I started gathering all the stuff up from around the house. Dickie and I didn't say much. I started gathering all the newspapers and all the clippings and all the things, guns, different things, and hiding him in the hiding hole. And I told Roger, I said, Roger, I may have to move you tonight. He was sick. I said, you're going to have to cough in your mouth or cough in a hanky or something because you're not going to be able to cough. I'm more like that, put you in the hole and lock it up. A little later, we heard some shooting up in the village. And I thought, oh, God. Then a German police car came down and stopped right next door and sat there, then moved over there and stood in front of our place. My God, you could hear a pin drop. Dickie and I were just sitting there looking, and then it turned around and went off. And oh, God, what a relief. Papa come home about an hour later, and he was really mad at us for making all the fuss. He said the meeting went on later. God, he was as cool as a cucumber. He never seemed to get too excited. Food shortage was very short. We used to get raw tobacco from the farmers and cut it up dry it in the attic and cut it up with a paper knife. Now that's tough smoking. Boy, oh boy, it was real tough. Come September the 15th, my mother got another letter from the Air Force saying they were trying hard, but nothing more. And your son is still missing, but they don't know if he's dead or alive or anything about him. Papa had to go on a raid one night in a farmer's. Some of these big farmers wouldn't sell food, to the ordinary people. They were keeping it for high-priced black market. So they raided the farm. Papa couldn't go in because he knew the farmer. They took bicycles and wagons that went on the back of the bicycles, stripped all the food and took it home. Papa had to hurry home because he knew the mayor would be phoning him up. He'd have to go out and check the raid because it was in his district. So right when he got home, he had to go out again and check the farmer and find out who was doing it and measure the bicycle and follow the bicycle. Of course, he led the bicycles the wrong way, but he didn't want to lead them the way he was going. He got back to the office the next morning, and a couple of German officers came around. He was going to head out the bathroom window. He's half out when he found out they weren't after him for that. It was something else, and they were just after him for something nice. So nothing happened. The electricity, we had no electricity. We had no cooking, had no heating. So we had no light, and we had no radio. So because all the lines were cut off. But in front of our house was electrical line going to the air raid signal. So Papa got a thin piece of wire and hooked it up from the hot wire of the airline signal into his line. So we always had one or two lights we could have on, but we had to keep the drapes pulled very tight, nobody would see it. And we could use our radio for news. We never used it for anything else but news, but we could always go up to our hiding place. It was kept in the hiding place, and we turned the radio on and got the BBC. We well knew the BBC. The Germans were collecting blankets. Everybody had to give one blanket or a set of clothes. And they would put a sticker on your house when you gave it. If you didn't, and they were sent to Germany, gifts from the Dutch people. And if you didn't send it, they took what they wanted. And they took an awful lot more, so it was really bad. Mance and Joe, their nephew from Amsterdam, came to live with us now. There were 13 of us in a 2-bedroom house. It was very crowded, and we had to be careful. I went up to Hettingars to visit them again in Utrecht, but it was only up there a couple of days when Papa found out they were going to make a raid right through Utrecht, all the houses, looking for divers, hiders. So he came up that night, no notice, no nothing, and I had to head out. So we went back to Rockers. St. Nicholas comes on December the 5th, and you'll see over there we had a party. There was about 13 of us with St. Nicholas, Swore Pete, and all the rest. And, unbelievable, right in the police station right in that time, having the party, but it was a great party. December the 20th, Fritz came around and gave orders that we had to move, that we're heading out and maybe going across the border December the 25th. So Papa took me in town to say goodbye to Hettingars, say goodbye to the Bays, and Dickie was very sad because Dickie had everything planned at Christmas. We had a rabbit in the shed we were going to kill for Christmas and everything else, but we left. There's pictures there over there where we're leaving. The night before we had a bottle of champagne, and Slim, one of the guys from the hospital, brought straight alcohol. We mixed it with Citron, and we had one bottle of champagne and the Citron. We had a little bit of party before we left. Then on December the 26th, my mother got a letter. My mother got another letter saying that I'd been seen in July the 7th. This was in December the 26th, but it's telling her that I've been seen on July the 26th, and she was not to tell anybody. It was very secret. She would not even tell her friends that someone was hiding me, and if it was against their life and anybody's life to know, but just to let us know. So June, July, August, September, October, November, December. That was 6 months. That was the first she heard definitely that maybe I was alive. Otherwise, she didn't know. December the 23rd, we headed south on bikes. We headed down to about 20 miles down across the Rhine to a place called Cornelissen. I met the fellow the teacher, and on the way, and I was so excited, I run out of the group, went over to see him, and he was still wearing my uniform dyed black, and I was wearing his sweater and pants. So we said goodbye to each other, and I told him I'd have a drink with him in London on New Year's, because I honestly expected to be over in London on New Year's Eve. We were going to cross the Rhine in a ferry. There was a ferry with a cable, one of these that you just self-propelled. So we each had our little money right ready, and I was last to get on the ferry. I give my money, and the ferry was stuck on the bank. So the German soldier jumped off the bank to push it off, and everybody yakking at me. I guess they were. I didn't know what they were talking, so I had to jump off, and I pushed the bank, and I was pushing with the German. And here we were, pushed the ferry off, jumped off and on. Imagine the German then not having a clue who the hell I was, and I knew who he was. So we stayed we were supposed to leave on Christmas Day, and we couldn't because the German soldier that was going to help us lead the way was sent on leave or posted, so we were stuck. So the fellow was making up a new way of getting out of there, and his name was Dirk, and he was making new plans. So we stayed there in this house all hidden, and we left January the 1st. We left to cross the border. We had to go through no man's land. We had to go through German lines, no man's lands, and across the Dutch Rhine. We were to go to this brickyard and meet in the brickyard, and then our guide had come, and we'd go to this bridge. We'd meet in the brickyard, and from there we'd go to this bridge and meet on the bridge, and the small bridge, and then a guide had come and take us through the lines. Well, we got over there, and we passed a guide, and they were coming around, and we were hiding in the brickyard attic, so they didn't see us, and I think they thought something was going on. I mean, we stuck so close to German lines, we could hear them talking in their little camps. You'd think it was a show you were seeing, where they have all this intriguing and all that, but you're right in it. So we were going on the way to that bridge, and we got halfway there, and God, all hell broke loose. They had 3 machine guns posted there, and they just shot H out of us. And I was with this Army Sergeant Major, and he said, I'll teach Army life overnight. And he sure as hell did. We sure learned Army life, because, we never knew Army life. And they shoot these flares at us, and then they just, and you just had to hit the deck. It was either mud, ice, or water. And it was awful. And Wilkberry, the Sergeant Major, he got shot through the arm here. I think 4 got killed that night. there was 2 got away, and we ended up in a fruit shack, and out in the flooded part, and there was some rotten sauerkrauts of apples. We tried eating that, and oh God, that was tough going. And so here Wilf and I, we half dozed around all night, and in the morning, Wilf's arm was beginning to tighten up and sore, had the bullet in it, and I had lost my shoes, and I was on the ice on bare feet. My feet were half frozen, and we didn't know what to do. We could hear voices, and we had to head for one of them. So we headed out to what we thought was the right way, and it wasn't. It was a German. So they captured us. Very luckily for me, and they gave me a pair of wooden shoes. That was a godsend, because when you're in bare feet on the ice and snow, you know it's tough going. The Dirk, he got captured. He was with us, and we didn't recognize him at all. We just totally ignored him. None of us had known any of us before that night. None of us. That was the deal, that if we ever get captured, you had to ignore everybody. And this poor Dirk, he was treated horrible because he was a Dutchman. They never gave him any shoes, and he just had a bunch of rags wrapped around his feet and the blood coming out of them. I had wooden shoes, and they gave me a cup of coffee. It was fantastic. We were integrated by the Field Army Police. We went down to, they took us to Arnhem, and we were in the Arnhem police station in and out, and then they took us to Utrecht into another big prison, Gestapo and SS again. They're tough and mean and miserable. I was in solitaire once, and for I think 10 days, and that's one of the worst things there is, I think. You're in a black hole in a room, you get a little bit of coffee, you get a little bit of soup, you get something, you don't know if it's day or night, you lay down to sleep, you don't know if you slept for 5 minutes or 5 hours, you don't know if it's day, you don't know if it's night, you don't know what it is. And then they took out and they'd interrogate again. The Germans were real mad because we had civilian clothes, and I had my discs in the heel of my shoe. I took the heel off, cut a hole, put the heel of my shoe in, put my shoe back on again, but then I lost my shoes. So the Germans treated us strictly as spies. They said we had no right to the Geneva Convention, no nothing. But as soon as I gave my name, rank, and number, they told me what crew I was from, what happened to my crew, what squadron I was from. They knew the whole history. They were very well organized, the Germans. We were in the prison at Utrecht. They were threatening to shoot us. We really thought we were going to get shot. I met a Dutchman that was seemed to know some people, and I asked him to try and get a hold of someone that I wanted to get what they call a diphtheria sandwich. Papa used to make them. They used to get the slim that worked in the hospital would get diphtheria from a guy's throat. He would make a sandwich. He'd send into prison. You'd get diphtheria. The Germans were scared of that. They'd put you in a hospital, take you out, put you in a hospital. The underground could liberate you from a hospital. They couldn't from a big jail like I was in. But I'd never made a contact, so that was never done. I never had my what's-called. One morning we woke up, and we were taken out and put into a truck. We didn't tell us where we were going. They did, of course, nothing to pack, and we just moved. A couple of Germans there, SS again. We had SS all the time, and they had a machine gun, and they took us right past Rocker's house where I'd been living. I swore they knew something about something. I was scared to look up. I was scared to do anything. But they didn't recognize anything. We went to another concentration camp. We were thrown into a concrete cell with no furniture, nothing, a bucket in the corner. Wilf Berry and I, the Army Sergeant Major, were together, and we heard this all night long. God, we couldn't figure out whether it was mice, rats, or what. But what it was our breath condensating on the ceiling and the drops dripping down on the concrete. I mean, that's all we had to lay on in concrete. We spent a lot of time there. When I was at that camp, there was a little window way up high. And we looked out one day, we heard these noise out there, and there was these girls out in the exercise yard. And the guards had dogs there nipping at them and everything else. And we waved at them all excited, but they didn't say much. And the Germans didn't say nothing, but that afternoon they painted all the outside of the window black. So from then on we couldn't see nothing. We're in there. You couldn't complain. My story always was, I lived in a farmhouse, I lived in this barn, I never knew anybody, I never talked. I mean, the story over 100 times. The same story, didn't know anyone, lived by myself. This one night, this big colonel was interrogating me, and he was going on and on and on about this living alone, living alone. He gave me a great big clout on the head, and he says, "You're a goddamn liar." And he turned around and lifted his paper, and there was a letter I'd written in Holland. I wrote this letter, and I written it on rice paper, rolled it all up thin, put it inside of a comb, sealed the comb and refinished the comb, and this Dutch couriers were taking it across the line. And he got caught. God knows what happened to him. They broke the comb open, and here I'd mentioned I'd been living with shelter up and everything else. I was very fortunate that it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. The German captain who was mad, he was tired. He physically kicked me out of his office and back to my cell, and I had time enough to sort of reorganize and make up another story. And then one night, it was getting towards the end, and the time is going. This big colonel was there talking, and after he finished, he closed his book and says, "The interrogation's over." He said, "We'll talk." He gave me a cigarette. And I said to myself, "Yeah, you son of a bitch, it's over, all right." And so he says to me, "When do you think the war will be over?" I says, "June, July." "Huh," he said. So I thought, hell, he's asking me. I said, "When do you think the war will be over, sir?" We're always respectable. And he says, "Oh, I think you're out on that." He says, "It'll be over around May." So then he said, "Who do you think will win?" I says, "The Allies." So he said, "Oh." Then he turned around and I said to him, "What the hell?" I said, "Who do you think will win, sir?" Well, he said, "I'll tell you this. The Allies will win on the battlefield, but they'll never beat the Russians." And it did take us a long time. So I guess he wasn't that stupid. But then just a little while later, all the big brass Germans seemed to be getting less and less and less SD. We knew there was something going on. All the German officers were going back to Germany. They turned around and then we got put in, one morning we got all put in the truck, and here was all Wehrmacht army. That's the regular army. No SS, no secret dienst, no Gestapo, no nothing. No machine gun, just a rifle. So we figured something was going, so they took us to a camp where they had brought all the different Air Force, all the guys got in. And they shoved the Army one way and shoved me the other way. And I was with all these new air crew. Now, you can visualize me. I'm in wooden shoes. I'd never washed or bathed or changed my clothes for 3 months, and I stunk. Well, these guys they had breakfast in England that morning, or the morning before, and they were trying to kick me out of the cabin. I said, "To hell with you." And they had these great big buckets of German sloppy soup and black bread. Of course, they wouldn't eat it. Ugh, so I just sat there and I ate like old hell. And of course, they had cigarettes and chocolates from all their escape package. They thought, well, they'll get lots more. So I was just out of mooching and eating. I just had a great time because they didn't know they weren't going to get no more. So then I got moved from there into we went to a day march, got through some towns, and all the German people were throwing stuff at them. There were terror flyers, and throwing stuff at them, everything else. I just hung at the back. I had old wooden shoes, and I slopped along there. They thought I was a Dutchman. They'd throw me the odd bit of food or something, but not them terror flyers up there. So I didn't do bad. Then we got shoved into a boxcar, and there was, you'll see pictures of them there, 40 men or 8 horses. There was 50 or 100 of us there. We thought it was a little tough. We looked at the door 2 or 3 times, and there was Jewish people in a boxcar, not 40, 50, maybe 150, 200. They couldn't even sit down. There were so many in the boxcar. People would die, and they couldn't even get them out of the boxcar. They had a couple little holes like this. They were just treated absolutely horrible. They were all dressed up in like pajamas. So we went on the train, and you guys knocked hell out of us because we had a great big POW on top of the train, but we were always in the middle of an ammunition train, and you guys shot hell out of us quite often. And everybody tried to take a crack at us. And then we took the train. It took us quite a while. We got back down to Nuremberg, and We were in Nuremberg for a while. We were in Nuremberg while they bombed up the whole city. We were right up on the top of the hill. And we were kind of nervous because we knew, goddamn, we weren't that far away from the target, and sometimes the bombs don't always hit that close. But nobody hit us anyhow, whether they were warned about it or not. They bombed the city. The next day, the guards were very mean. But then we had 1 day's notice, and there were 10,000 of us going to a march. We marched from the Nuremberg camp to Holbrooken. There was rows of us, miles and miles long. And we only had a bit of Red Cross bar, so we swiped food. One day I got some scruffed grain out of an elevator and picked all the grain out and put it in there, and I climbed up on this big wheel and rode down with it, ground it up, mixed it with some vitamin pills from the Red Cross parcel, and what I thought was the best pancakes you ever tasted. And they were good. So 16 days later, we got to Holbrooken camp. We hung around there, and then Patton came along and came through the gate. The night before, the senior officer took over the camp. Patton came in the next day with his open Jeep, and we were free. It took us about 10 days to get back to England, and we had to have a big raffle in the camp who was going to get back first. And I hiked anyhow. I hiked about 12 miles up to Rebergen or something, and I couldn't get a plane that day, so I went back, slept out, and then the next day I got a plane. We went back to Reims in France and had a great meal, then to England, then to Bournemouth, and 6 weeks leave. I've kept track of all the people, and the end of my book is what happened to all these people 50 years later. And I've got to know them all very well, and they've been the best friends. One very sad thing, on May the 10th, my mother got a letter from the Air Force saying, it's a long letter, saying the last they heard on January the 2nd, this was May the 10th, that I'd been seen on the ice. We were all shot up. There was 4 or 5 killed that night. The last I'd seen anyone that saw me, because this captain had got back, was this, we were running across the ice. The Germans were shooting. They were pretty sure I was shot. And they're saying they're very sorry, but that's about the last they heard. That was on May the 10th, Mother's Day. On Mother's Day morning, she got a telegram from me, back in England, good and healthy, love, Bob. So that was, anyone in Burnaby will know about me arriving home. I think you could hear my mother all over, because that was a year later, after getting all the letters saying I'd been seen, I'd been heard, I'd been shot, I'd been gone, and then she got the telegram, back in England, good and healthy, love, Bob. So that's my story. Is there any questions?
I have a question, Bob. I want to know what sort of boots, flying boots, you had when you bailed out. That's my first question. And were they the zipper type that you could take off the tops and walk? And the second question is, when you got to Reims, did you fly out in a Lank 3? Because I picked up some people in Reims, and I can't tell you the date. I guess that was May. And I'd just like to know.
I can't remember my flying boots, so I think I must have had regular boots on. The gunners wore the big boots, but we didn't, and I must have had the regular boots, because otherwise they would have spotted me, but I can't really remember what boots I had. And when I flew back out of Reims, we flew in Lanks. But a lot of Lanks flew out of Germany too, but I couldn't get any. But I asked one crew when they flew over to the station to see my wife, to beep down and tell Ginge I was on my way home. But I never did hear any more.
Thank you. There is one other question. When we flew the people back from Reims, I put one fellow who had been out for some years, I put him up in the turret, and I'm just wondering if that would have been you, or you don't remember that?
No, I don't remember that. No, they took us to southern England. They didn't take us to Bournemouth. They dumped us off in southern England, and then we had to make our own way to Bournemouth. There was no organization. We bummed money from people on the street to use a phone. And because after being in prison of war a couple of years, you don't mind bumming money. And we bummed money to even phone and get something to eat. Any other questions?
Yeah, Bob, Tony Craven, what part of Burnaby did you live in?
Right on the corner of Royal Oak and Imperial.
Yeah, well,
I went to Nelson Avenue School, then Burnaby South.
Yeah, I went to Burnaby South. I lived on Sperling Avenue down by the lake.
Kingsway West or Nelson Avenue type?
No, Douglas Road.
Eh?
Douglas Road Elementary, and then Burnaby South for high school.
I was there. I quit school in 41. I was in grade 11.
Right.
I quit in Easter of 41. My father was very displeased. But I wasn't caring much for school.
Thanks very much.
Bob, how did you find the addresses of the people that helped you? How did you get in touch with them, or did they get in touch with you?
I left my addresses with them all, and one wrote, then the other wrote, and then back and forth.
Yeah.
And I've been back in Holland about 5 times, and 2 of them have been over here quite a few times. So I have full contact with everybody I had contact with, and most of their pictures are in my book there. I've got them all on my computer, and where they are and what. And they're just as tough now as they were, and they're 84, 89, and 94, and they're just as tough as they were before.
Yeah. One other question. What happened to the rest of your crew?
And they were buried in, I can't even think of the name of the town now. No, I guess it's late at night. They're all buried together. There's a picture of them where they're putting flowers on the grave. The graves are like parks, just absolutely beautiful. And 2 of the crew were carbonized in the plane. 3 of them didn't get their chute opened. And the English engineer, he got out and was made prisoner of war. But all the regular crew were all killed and buried in Holland there. I go back to their graves. I'm not much for graveyards, but I do go back there about every 5 years and just sort of think, we were very close. As you all know here, you're close to your crew, and they were close to me.
Well, Bob, could I ask one question there?
Yeah.
What operation would you be on when you had the Burton there?
I always thought it was my 13th, but going through my log and going through more studying right down, it was on my 8th trip.
Yeah, because your time coincided a lot with mine, I think. I just was wondering about that.
Yeah, well, 8th.
Bob, you mentioned something horrible that they gave you to drink there. Did you ever find out what that was?
The farmer that gave it?
Yeah.
No, I never did.
Oh.
I never did, but it was just something, I guess it was something to them, but it was something foreign to me.
It was the most horrible stuff I ever drank. I landed near Zilbeck, and these people took me into their house and gave me this drink of something. They said it was coffee, but...
Oh, that's the ersatz coffee.
This was some kind of burnt rope, I think, and it was the most horrible stuff I ever drank, but I smiled and said it was good.
Yeah. Well, we had some pretty different thing there. I never did like buttermilk, and they used to make porridge out of buttermilk in the morning, and then put it in the blankets and leave it there all day, and then have it for dinner. And for someone that doesn't like buttermilk, it's tough going. But I used to eat it anyhow. Well, that looks about all. You've been a great audience, and everything was quiet. I really enjoyed it. It's the first time I've done it, and I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, too.